How do we unpick things like the ECHR? How do we deal with activist judges? And how do we deal with the people that are now here that will never understand our way of life?
You've given a very, very admirable summary. The answer is we undo. Right. That this is what Thatcher understood. She understood you have to repeal. She understood you had to demolish. We've to start to demolish. What we need now is a firm commitment from the right that they will begin the process of absolutely root and branch demolition of every major piece of legislation of the Blair, Brown, Cameron and May, and also, I'm afraid, Boris governments, right through. The lot has got to go. We can now see it's created a totally malfunctioning state. Again, one of the things that, of course, the whole business of rights has done is to create much of the impossible burdens of expenditure. You see, what you do is you have statutes which gives rights to the parents of disabled children, so-called disabled children, SEND, special educational needs. Those rights require, for example, that local authorities have to provide individual transport. That we have children in the country now who are sent to school by special taxi every day, in some cases at a cost of £100,000 per child. That's because you give them a legal right that can be enforced. If you give a legal right to an individual, not to everybody, but to a specific class of individuals, what you're doing is giving them a right to take money out of your pocket and my pocket. That's what these sectional rights, that's what they actually mean. So again, when we set up, even more damaging, I think, than the incorporation of the ECHR is the Equality Act, because what the Equality Act does is to create 9 protected characteristics, some of which fight with each other. The absurdity that we've seen again in the debate in Fife over the transgendered doctor who insisted on charging into a nurse's, because he pretended to be a woman, charging into a nurse's changing room. That is because the Equality Act has both gender, this invented thing. Gender is grammar. It's nothing to do. It's this idea that sex is somehow invented, and sex are both protected characteristics, and of course they contradict each other. Even worse is the idea that sex is also a protected characteristic in terms of employment. That means you have this fantastic notion that men and women are not simply entitled to the same wages for the same job. They're entitled to the same wages for jobs that judges think are the same.
Hence Birmingham.
Hence Birmingham, hence bankrupting Birmingham. Yeah. So we have the one Act of Parliament, which is bankrupting Birmingham, which is responsible for the nonsense in Fife, and also is completely destroying industrial relations on a gigantic scale, because it's encouraging, and indeed race relations, because again, race is a protected characteristic. It's encouraging people to invent racial grievances just to jazz up a general dispute about employment. That one piece of legislation, the responsibility of the dreadful Harriet Harman, is, I would reckon, has cost the country already hundreds of billions of pounds. You will say that's an exaggeration. It's cost Birmingham alone £500 billion. It's about to bankrupt important sections of the retail trade. I mean, it is because, again, the argument that the job of a shop assistant and a warehouseman are the same. Yeah. It's deranged.
Yeah,
but the very idea that you have judges determining wages is even sillier if you actually look at the dreadful Theresa May's Climate Change Act, the 2015 Act. The 2015 Act, because it legislates net zero, the achievement of net zero by 2050, gives judges the power to determine whether or not you can drill in the North Sea, whether or not you can frack. I mean, the idea that judges determine economic policy, that judges determine wages, this is madder than anything we got ourselves into in the 1970s. At least the Prices and Incomes Boards of the 60s and 70s were people who actually knew a little bit about industrial relations. This is merely the abstraction. And again, I think one of the most important issues, of course, is that because of this extraordinary inflation of the idea of law, traditionally judges in Britain, judges in England, knew they were subordinate to Parliament. They had a responsibility for enforcing statute passed by Parliament fairly and independently, but they did not see themselves as being above it. The terribly dangerous thing that's happened now, call the thing a Supreme Court and they start to behave like one, especially when you have a figure of the sublime intellectual arrogance of Brenda Hale, the Spider Woman, the first president of the Supreme Court, and the extraordinary business of ruling Boris Johnson's prorogation illegal. That's a direct challenge to the Bill of Rights of 1689, and you can see judges nudging themselves above Parliament, and the most important way they've done it is by reinventing the rule of law. Now, the rule of law basically just means you follow proper procedure, but the judges have given it this amplified meaning. It now means all that, but incorporating other grandiose notions like human rights law, like, still worse, international law. Yeah. When did we last worry about international law and regard it as being binding? The answer is never till now, and never until you had a Prime Minister like Starmer and an Attorney General like Richard Hermer. Hence the fact, the lunacy of giving away the Chagos Islands and actually bribing Mauritius with hundreds of billions at a time when we're bankrupt. Laying ourselves open again to reparations, laying ourselves open to reparations for industrialization. I mean, all of that. Because again, one of the things that is, I think, Nick, most important to realise, a consequence of this whole way of thinking, the whole Blair, Starmer, Hermer way of thinking, is you have no notion of a national interest. Mm-hmm. We've completely lost any notion that this country has a right to, itself has got a right, itself has got an interest. Any notion that the native population of this country is what the government should be answering to. You know, we even had a leading figure of the Blair years and after, Gus O'Donnell, the permanent secretary of the Treasury, saying that he thought his responsibility was global welfare. Not just national. What on earth is a British civil servant saying that for? You know, I mean, there's genuinely been. I think it may be a problem of late. I wonder whether it's a problem of late empire. You know, that having as it were just ceased to rule the world. Because remember, when I was born, the king was still Emperor of India. Right. That Suez, I'm 11, I remember vividly Suez. By the way, I was a terrible lefty. I was the only boy in my school who supported Nasser. You can imagine how well that went down. So that loss of empire, but having just ceased to rule the world, it seems to me that our ruling class decided it was their duty to set a good example to the world. Right. And this is the catastrophe that we're in now, and why all the things like the so-called rules-based international order, which indeed with America we were directly, in fact in many ways more than America, we were responsible for creating in 1945, have actually been turned against us. Because we went into it, as it were, with belief in principles of honesty, decency, and fair play. But of course, many other international players have completely different views. It's why we can't negotiate with the French. You know, I don't know how well you know France. One of the things that's striking about the French is they've got no problem in saying no. Mm. They rather enjoy saying non. Mm-hmm. You'll get non in a shop. In England, it's completely It's so ill-mannered. We say things like, "Oh, I'm terrible." Well, no. Well, actually, do you mind? That's a firm no. I mean, we're almost as indirect as the Japanese, and so this makes for a terrible problem when you deal with those who are capable of saying no.